And here we go. Hello, and welcome to our first panel for the Op at Home. We're joined today with the designers and developers for our Cody Chronicles games, with games such as Scooby Doo, Escape from the Haunted Mansion, and The Shining, Escape from the Overlook Hotel. Very exciting. I'm Ross Thompson, the marketing manager here at the Op, and I'm joined with a wonderful crew. Cami?
Hi, I'm Cami Mandel. I work here at the Op, and I had the pleasure of playtesting through both of these games, and I cannot wait for everybody else to get the opportunity to do so.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay Cormier. I'm one of the designers for the Scooby Doo and the Shining game, and yeah, it was obviously a dream come true to play in the Scooby Doo world.
Pat?
I'm Pat Marino, the game design manager at the Op, so also, like Cami, helped with some of the testing and development of these games.
And Sen?
Hi, I'm Sen Feng Lim. I'm one of the co-designers behind the game, and yeah, like Jay said, dream come true. Scooby Doo is my #1 intellectual property ever in the world, so thank you very much to the Op for giving us the chance to work on that.
Well, I'm glad we could do that. Scooby Doo is a super blast, and it's definitely an exciting time right now with Scooby Doo, with the new Scooby movie coming out, and people experiencing like all these different. There's a whole many Scooby Doo cartoons and movies on Netflix as well. So it's kind of fun that we get to like revisit that as we explore with all these new things that are coming in a new medium. So kind of to kick it off. So what led to the design of the Coded Chronicles system? Sen?
So I think it was Tony and Andrew were talking to us at the gathering. Was it at the gathering, Jay?
Yeah.
It was at the gathering when Tony said, Tony, by the way, is another person at the Op, said, hey, we have this idea about escape rooms, and we know you guys like escape rooms. What do you think about making escape rooms? And we're like, yeah, let's do this. And they said, well, but it would have to be licensed. And we're like, okay, sure, throw the licenses at us. And they said, well, I don't know which one it's going to be, but what do you think about Scooby Doo? And we're like, what? So that's how that started. It was just a mutual love of games and Scooby Doo.
Jay?
Kind of it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's starting to design this game. We immediately had this realization that it had to be more narrative, that it had to tell a story more so than other escape room in a box games have done before. It couldn't just be a collection of puzzles. And as we started kind of trying to figure out what you're doing and how you're moving things around, we really quickly came to this kind of a point where we thought people are going to want to play as Scooby and the gang. They're going to want to move those characters around. And so that really guided us and directed us on how we were going to design this game from the ground zero.
That's great. Pat and Cami, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd add a little sort of pre-backstory, I guess, is we knew internally at the Op that we were thinking a licensed escape room series would be a really great addition to our line. Obviously, a lot of people love escape rooms. We have an awesome catalog of partners that we work with for licensing. So we had been exploring kind of this idea for a while, and even looked at some of the big partners in the escape room space for potential in the at-home escape room space. So the Unlocks, the Exits, and some of those games, to figure out if there was a way we might work with some of those teams to do this series. And I think Jay really nailed it in why we ultimately opted to do our own series and to find a good design team that could do that was the need for narrative. In order to really bring a license alive, it couldn't be just a series of puzzles that loosely relate to the IP. You had to be able to get into the story and really, as those characters, explore it. And we hadn't really figured out quite how to do that internally. And fortunately, Tony and Andrew and some other folks had the idea to reach out to Jay and Sen and see what they could do with their expertise. I remember the sort of first overarching idea they brought back to us for how this system might work, and talking a little bit about it being kind of like point and click adventure game, but with map tiles and things like that, and thinking like, yes, that's what we need. And then when we got those first narrative books and some of the other components of it, it was very clear that not only was this a really great fit for Scooby, but a really great template that we could take to other licenses in the future, which is exactly what we needed.
That's great. Cami, anything to add on that?
So my first experience was literally having this box in my hand and going, wow, there is so much more in here than an escape room. I've played the exits, I've played the unlocks, and it's not that, which is an amazing and robust experience that really puts you into the story. So I sat there and I'm like, oh my goodness, this can't be an escape room. It's so much more. It's so much deeper, and it's all in the narrative. It's all that content, and you want to explore it all. And that's when we decided we can't time this game. And so even though it's an escape room, it is not timed. We want you to take that opportunity to explore the depth of what has been created here and not feel like there is a constraint on you, because it is so cool and there's so much to learn and see.
Good point. We actually had that learning as well. We for the longest time when Sen and I were designing it, just because that's how escape room box work, we had a time limit as far as like a score or something based on a time, just kind of baked into the game. And then as we play tested the game, we found that people were just wanting to see, well, let's see what happens when Shaggy interacts with this. What's going to happen? And they wanted to read it all. And that added to the time, but they were having a blast with it. So yeah, you're right. Taking the time away was a great idea.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the narrative bit. It's all new content for Scooby Doo, right? So somebody, feel free. Yes, Ed.
I'll take that. It was actually probably the biggest professional feather in my cap personally. When we had a meeting, Cammy was on the call. I don't know if Pat was, but I know Cammy was on the call with the licensor, and they asked us, "So which story is this from? Which episode is this from?" We're like, "No episode." You mean you wrote that? Yeah, we wrote all of that. Like, well, it's exactly what a Scooby-Doo adventure should be. And so as a lifelong Scooby-Doo fan, like I still have memories. So I used to come home from swimming lessons thinking of chlorine, and I would get home Saturday morning at like 9 o'clock after my swimming lessons, smell like chlorine, and just sit and watch Scooby-Doo. And so Scooby-Doo to me is embedded in my soul. And so when I could write something and be part of something that the licensor said, yep, we couldn't tell the difference.
That's great.
For me, that's amazing. And so the narrative elements tie the whole story together, make the puzzles come alive and make sense in a way that, you know, I've played a lot of the unlocks and a lot of the other systems, and they don't make as much sense to me.
Like the puzzles,
yeah.
The puzzles themselves are fun. There's a good puzzles in all these games. That's great. But Sen and I agreed early on that, like, who made these puzzles? Why is there a puzzle right now? Like, who did this? And oftentimes there's no answer to that. It's just, oh, because you're playing an escape room in a box. So we wanted really hard to make sense of, like, why is there a puzzle right now?
What's the motivation?
Who made it? Like, who in the world, not us, but in this world that we created, who made the puzzles? And that was one of our biggest aspirations in this game, is to make sure that felt like made sense.
Yeah, that definitely drives a lot of points. And it's neat because each character has their own thing they do along with the story. So it isn't just, you know, like Scooby's going to like do different stuff. Everybody has a different aspect to it. Pat?
Yeah, I think it's really essential, in particular with Scooby-Doo, that each of these characters, because in the episodes, right, and in the show, they each kind of play a recurring role on the team of what they do, what they bring to the team, and who they are. And it's just one more way that the license really comes to life when you're playing it is, you know, if you're doing all the clever stuff that's figuring things out, that's really a Velma thing, right? And if you're building traps, it's really a Fred thing. And it feels authentic in that way, that each of these characters is doing what they should be doing, and even carrying over into The Shining. Like, you see the same thing of, like, you know, Danny has a special skill that Wendy does not have, and that means something in the gameplay, and being able to use that. And I know, sort of as we look towards the future for, you know, some other licenses we want to do, and when we, you know, Ross, you're part of these discussions in line development. And somebody will throw out a license of, you know, we could add that to the Coded Chronicles line. And there's always like oh yeah, because you can start picturing like where those characters would go and what each character would bring to the story and how they would play in these mysteries or in these adventures. So it's just really cool too that this system and the way it's built allows for that in a really clean way, that it's not, oh, well, we could have a character do this, but we'd have to force fit it in there, because the narrative books are so flexible in the story that they can tell and the way they can bring this to life. So I I think that's one of the things I really appreciate is it's hard to find a license that wouldn't work within this system and where we wouldn't be able to come up with a story or a gameplay that would fit.
So, Pat, you're saying we're going to be employed for a long, long time?
That's my hope, at least.
So yeah, you can just do like 2 to 3 a year, right? You're on this?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Kenny, what
actually,
do you
2 to
think?
3 a year would be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kenny, what do you think about all the different narrative stuff?
Oh, that's the most fun. And I think, from my perspective, because I'm trying to give feedback that is helpful and useful to Jay and Sen as to where people are having trouble. So, I'm playing with a whole groups of different people. So every round of playtesting, I'm doing 2 or 3 things. By the end of it, I've got codes memorized, and I know when somebody has done something wrong, and you just sit there and you start trying not to smile. You have those faces. People are going, "Oh, I know, we have to do this," and you're like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah." But it's so fun to watch everything evolve, and those puzzles, some of them are super challenging, and you just sit there and you're like, there's no way anybody's ever going to solve it. And one person at the table will just suggest something randomly out of blue, and suddenly it's like everything pops.
So on the puzzles, how did you guys come up with all the different puzzles that are in the games?
Well, I'll start by saying that it was really important for Sen and I that we did what we call scaffolding the player into the game. And what we mean by that is that we ease you into the gameplay so that we just don't overwhelm you with like, here is 50 things you can do, go to it. And so we actually start the story off with only one character. You only can control one of the characters, and all the other characters kind of disperse throughout this mansion. And as you go through the mansion, you start to kind of collect them and reform your group. And what that does, it allows the players to really ease into the mechanics and like, oh, I can do this with Velma. I'm like, okay, move around. And then you find somebody else and you're like, oh, now I can do this. And you start investigating some of the other stuff you already investigated with this new character. What does this character do? And it's just a nice way of easing them into the puzzles. And maybe Sen, you can take from there as far as other puzzle design concepts.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tack on to what you said in terms of like, so I'm a teacher, and from an educational model, that idea of momentum and gaining momentum, and that the puzzles start off easy and get harder, especially in a game that we knew would be played with kids. We want people to be able to solve the first one. We don't want to end up at a wall and go, I guess we're not going to play the rest of it because we can't do the first one. So the first one had to be super solvable, easy to manage, and that just gives the people the confidence to keep on playing so that they don't give up, because we want them to see the whole game. We want them to play all the way through. We're not in this to stump people. We want them to have a good experience when they feel like they got something out of it through the puzzles. And so the puzzle creation was a lot of that. A lot of it is really fine-tuning the idea that any puzzle that Jay and I think is easy is probably hard. And any problem that we think is hard is probably impossible. Because we know the truth in our head. We know the solution. And so we test them out on each other, but that's not even good enough. Like, we need to have other people test them. We need to have our kids test them. Well, not Jay's kids. They're like 3, so that's not useful. But my kids will test them, and they'll go, yeah. And I might have to give them some hints here and there. And that helps us actually come up with the hinting system as well. It's like, okay, they couldn't get it here, but after I give them this hint, they were much better at it.
Because I would add to that, and in addition to the scaffolding, we also had to be concerned with grouping. And what I mean by that is that in these kind of puzzle games, if you're given a bunch of things at once, it becomes really complicated because you don't know what goes with what. Should I use this in this puzzle or this in this puzzle? And so that's also part of the fun of trying to figure that out. But if you give too much, it makes a simple puzzle really difficult because you have no idea what goes with what. So we had to kind of ease players in by giving a little bit. And then what we always like to do with our puzzles is make things multiple use, so that you don't ever just use one room or one thing once, that it'll come back in a different way and hopefully clever way, so that it kind of gives some satisfaction, some aha feelings to the players.
Yeah, and then we also do a board wipe every now and then where it's like, okay, all those things can go away, which is something that you don't see in a lot of even adventure games like point and click adventure games. It's like that's in your inventory forever. Like, why am I carrying this thing still? And so in terms of a game like this where there's table space but also mental capacity, like brain space, we wanted to clear a lot of that off. So we have like little kind of almost like reset points during the game where it's like, okay, all these 3 things can go away now because you've used them. They won't be used anymore. You don't need to think about them anymore. The other thing that we have to think about during puzzle design is multiplayer. And so a lot of puzzles in a lot of the games are very solitary. And so we actually tried to make sure that they aren't as much as possible. That multiple people will be looking at the things, or the whole table will be looking at the map tiles going, oh, this is where this goes and that's where this goes. And that people will have maybe access to not different information, but because they're seeing the table from different angles, they might see different things in there. And this is really important because it is a game that you're playing with other people, typically. You could go ahead and solo play this. I don't think you'd have as much fun, though. I think it's just interesting to solve puzzles with other people because of what, Cami says, like, oh, somebody says something and it clicks. And I think that's the wonderful thing about playing games with people and solving puzzles with people, is that you might not have the solution, but if somebody gives you that little start, then you can figure out the rest. So the puzzles are created such that when we think about graphics, we're always thinking about, color blindness. We're thinking about literacy levels. We're thinking about all those things. We're thinking about, numeracy, so that we don't have a lot of number-based puzzles. Well, they're number-based, although there's a lot of number-based puzzles, but they're not mathematical or math fact puzzles in the way that you might see in some other games where it's like, multiply this and add this and divide that. It's like, that's not necessarily actually easy for some people. And so we don't want to limit the entry level to people by making it that difficult. And besides, most of those types of puzzles don't make much sense as to why they would be a puzzle, right? It's like, why am I doing math to solve this? Why am I doing a Sudoku to
open
solve
this door,
crime, or open a door? So
now, Sen, you brought up something interesting there about the wiping of the information, and actually, I want to ask Cami and Pat this because it came from you guys.
Yeah.
The concept and idea to put this whole game into 2 acts. I don't know if you want to share with how you came to that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces to that, and one is when you have a narrative-driven game, right, with no time limit, there's an opportunity to really get into it on a deeper level and take the time to read all the narrative and really enjoy it. And we were finding that most groups were taking a pretty substantial amount of time to get through all of the content in the game, which is a really good thing from a value proposition. But on the flip side, like, if the only way you could play it was, you better have a 3-hour window clear and you're going to go through this whole thing, that doesn't necessarily work for every play group. Picture like a family after dinner wanting to jump into it, and then it gets to be bedtime for the kids or whatever the case may be, or they just need a break. So having that natural stopping point kind of gave people the opportunity of like, hey, if you're all in and really excited and still solving puzzles and you have the energy, you can go and you can keep going through. But if you want to kind of spread out your experience and it's very easy for you to reassemble that game group, there's a way to do it without having to do this sort of artificial, well, somebody grab their phone and take a picture of everything on the table and try to remember where it was because we have to move it in order to, live life on our table the next day. So it really helped with that. And I think the wiping element and clearing some of the stuff off helped with that as well, because it made it very clear to be able to say, these are the things you need to keep going. These are the things that you don't need. So you can kind of store it and just what you need for the next act and then break that out. So I think for us, it achieved a number of goals of giving a pause point for people who don't have as much time in a play session, but also giving that added clarity of, okay, you've passed that milestone. You can move on from this content and move into new content, which I think was exciting for people in another way too, to say like, oh, we've achieved halfway, even if it's not exactly halfway. It's like, oh, we're making progress. And for me, that goes back to something Sen was saying earlier, is this sort of, you need the right scaling, right? You need the right challenge versus ability, because nobody wants to like watch an episode of Scooby Doo and find out halfway through, like, it's too hard and we don't get to see how it ends, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if suddenly the cartoon was like, if you can't solve this math problem, you don't get to see the big reveal of the mask being pulled off. Like, that's not satisfying for anybody,
Not
right?
at all.
So it has to be something that you can finish, and obviously there's the hints and things to get you through it, but like, we want people to have the full experience, unlike maybe an in-person escape room where you go and it's like, well, your hour's up and you didn't solve it, bye. And having had that experience once at an escape room, it was sort of like, but I don't really want to shell out the money to come back and redo puzzles I know how to do just so I can get to the next stage. Like, so I'll just never know how that ends. And that's just not a good experience for folks. So we wanted to create multiple ways that like the ending was achievable and approachable for different groups.
Building on that, Pat, the other thing that halfway point did is it allowed us to double check and make sure everybody had done what they needed to that point. And we didn't have a way to have that check in there before. And a lot of times, because this is an explore the mansion at your pace and do whatever, one very important card might not have been revealed early on. And this was that you can't solve the puzzle without this card, and it gave us a point to check and make sure people had done everything that was needed to really make sure that they could solve it and come to that conclusion at the end.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm just like learning all this stuff about the game. It's great. So along with that, one of the things we can talk about a little bit was the art for the game, and this was all new art for Scooby Doo. Right, and a lot of that kind of leads into the puzzles and how that gets made. Without sharing too much about like how to beat the puzzles, how did the art kind of come into play when you were designing that? Like, how did you make sure that you led some things that were able to get found and all of that? Like how does that lead to tell more of the story? If that makes sense.
How does the art lead into the story?
Yeah,
well, there's definitely some collaboration. I would even possibly say more so in the Shining game when it comes to the art, as far as how important, integral that art was to some of the puzzles. But there was definitely some things in this that required us to communicate to the artists, hey, we need help here. There's going to be a puzzle here that you artistically need to do something. We can't obviously say exactly what we're talking about, but you have full reign to do this. Just make sure the end goal is that we need this in this room and this in this room, and you can hide it or draw it or create it in a way that is fun and interesting. So there was definitely a little bit of wiggle room in the Scooby Doo for the artists to have some fun and create, help us create some of the puzzles with the guidelines, and more so in The Shining.
Yeah, so the art and the puzzles kind of are, if it has to be spatial, it has to work, right? It has to fit properly.
Yeah.
And so we ran into a couple problems with the original art. And it's just not because the artist is a bad artist. The artist is a great artist. It's that we didn't communicate it properly, or they interpreted what we communicated in a way that wasn't intended, or sometimes they took license with, oh, it could just do this. It's like, oh, yeah, that looks beautiful, but it can't be there because it messes up something else. And so as we do more of these games, we're getting a little bit better at the process of directing the art, which is difficult because artists are artists and they have great talent, and they respond to feedback well. But if you ask them to do too many changes too many times, then they get upset, and it's understandable. At the end of the day, though, the game needs to work, which is very different from a lot of other games where it's like, it needs to look good, and your idea of it looking good and my idea of it looking good are maybe two different things. Or do you know how long it will take me to make that look exactly like you want it? Is it worth it to you to do that? Whereas us, it's like, if it doesn't look that way, the puzzle actually breaks.
Yeah. And we were really fortunate to have Rob Lundy as the artist for the first two games. His versatile skill was amazing. Like the Scooby Doo one looks like right out of a Scooby Doo. Like everything looks like this is from Scooby Doo. And then he totally changes 180 for The Shining. It's amazing. And so we definitely owe him a big thanks to everything he did, because it was way better than I thought it was going to be. And I know Rob's art, and I was expecting good stuff, but it was way better than I was expecting.
Yeah, it helps that he's a background artist for Warner Brothers cartoon.
I would definitely do it.
Well, I know at the outset too, we had talked about like how important art was going to be in the series, right? It's like, you know, for a lot of licensed games, we get access to style guide art and things like that that we can position in place. If you picture like a traditional card game where you have sort of a template with game icons and information at the bottom and an art image at the top that can just be pulled from somewhere and placed. But in this case, art and graphic design for the function of the game are the same thing, right? There wasn't an opportunity to say, okay, we're just going to source some art and then we'll overlay the puzzles on top of it with some iconography and some text and things. It really had to be in there in a way that you have to hunt for it, you know, and you're kind of trying to figure out what in the image is of interest or of note. What do we need to investigate? How do we use these things? Like that's a lot of the fun of exploring the fact that we have map tiles and you're moving about in a location. And so finding a way to do that with the art, I think like we knew from the outset was going to be important. And that's why I think from our perspective at the op, rather than trying to take the prototype art, right, which we had, which was functional, but, you know, white backgrounds and things like that, and then like give that to somebody on our team to say, okay, you know, like we're going to go to one of our illustrators in house and have them do it. We wanted Jay and Sen to be directing that process because of how integrated those things were. Right. And in order to make sure like we didn't say, okay, we think we understand the puzzle because we've tested it, and then we've had our artists do it, and then they get it back and go, no, that doesn't work at all. So we really wanted to limit the go-between in that process between puzzle designers and artists and have them handle it directly.
That's cool. I love that I'm learning about this game. Every single question we have here. So along with that, what are you guys looking forward to once people get this game into their hands and start playing it? Like, what are some of the experiences and things that you hope they're going to learn from playing Cody Chronicles? Cammie?
For me, I hope it brings families together. I hearken this back to the days where you'd have people dress up and have dinner parties and do something, and you make it a big event around this. It's so immersive. I feel like you have an opportunity here to really own the experience. And it may not seem like that. You think, okay, I'm just doing an escape room. It's fun. It's there's so much depth to this game. And I feel the same way about The Shining. We just watched Ready Player One again this weekend, and they have that one scene with The Shining in there, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot about this and this and this, and everything comes back to The Shining game again with how spot on the art is in that game, that it was recognizable even in an off movie when they were trying to reference back. And so it was just fun, you know, everything about it.
Jay?
Well, I hope that people do want to get in character, and I've noticed that every time we play tested the Scooby Doo game, people would do the voices.
Of course they would.
You can't not. Everyone wants to say Jinkies or everyone wants to do it, and they have fun. And as we are doing right now, everyone smiles when this happens, and that's just free entertainment that comes in this game, because we designed all that stuff, but we get all this extra nostalgia and goodwill that Scooby Doo has brought to the universe in this game when people play it. And I'm excited for people to kind of like what the licensor said when they said, yeah, this feels like a Scooby Doo episode. That's what we want to hear people say over and over again. That's
great. Pat?
I think for me, like building off of that, like it's the teamwork aspect of it, right? And as I think Jay said earlier, you could play these solo, but solving puzzles is better with a bunch of perspectives. And what I love is that the narrative books are separated into multiple books. So there's an ability to very clearly pass out information that is in the game so that everyone does need to work together. And having done, you know, some at the table escape rooms, some in-person escape rooms, like the best experiences I've ever had with those are ones where everyone walks away feeling like I was a linchpin to like unlocking something. You know, it wasn't quarterbacked by one person who could solve all the puzzles. It was like everybody found that one key piece of information that moved the group forward. And I think this system really provides for that. So that's part of what I hope is that people walk away, no matter what narrative book they had or what puzzle they were looking at, feeling like they really contributed and added something to it. And then the other piece is because the material is so on point to the source, is that it sort of drives people back to the content, right? Of like, after testing The Shining a whole bunch, it was like, I got to watch the movie again, you know? And Scooby Doo, like, it was like, oh, Well, this newer series is on Netflix. I've never seen it. Time to watch some more Scooby Doo, right? Because and you're watching it going, yeah, that does feel exactly like the experience I had around the table. Like it I feel more connection with these characters now because I've sort of played through the experience of being them. So I'm hoping it helps people relive the content, and then also if they haven't seen it in a while, or maybe they've never experienced, that it drives them to check out the original material.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah,
Sim?
I think that's a great idea. Like, I would love it if more kids today knew who Scooby Doo was. Like I said, it was my childhood. So I didn't drive around in a green van and solve mysteries, but I really liked Scooby Doo. And so for more families to introduce their kids to that material would be wonderful to me. So that's what I'm hoping for.
That's great. So on another fun question, who is everyone's favorite character while working on the game? Yeah, you guys can think about it for a second.
Like Scooby's my favorite character, but I'm just trying to think in the game concept. I'd probably say Shaggy because of the ability that he has, which I don't know if we want to say or not.
Yeah.
He has the ability to eat, and so it just was really, really fun for him to, because you could have him eat anything that exists, and you could have him try to at least, and then it was so fun to write all of his responses. And when I saw people play test, they're like, oh, I want to eat that rug over there. Let me try to see what happens. Because they wanted to see what happens. And the funny lines that we got to write and jokes we got to write about that was my favorite part.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever played any point-and-click adventures like Zack McCracken or Monkey Island, making the mistakes is the funniest part of the game, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say, I liked writing Shaggy a lot. I also really appreciate Daphne. So we kind of took her out of Danger Prone Daphne trope. She does still get in trouble, but she also solves a lot of things. So she has the ability to use things, which is so she's not a damsel in distress, which is what I really liked. Being able to really point that out to people, because in the original series, Daphne was, the name Danger Prone Daphne comes from the trope that she always gets in trouble. And as the series progresses over the history from, the late 60s, early 70s into now, less and less, much less of Danger Prone Daphne. Like, she has a black belt in judo and all this kind of stuff. So she's capable. And I really wanted to show that part of her when we made the character, I guess, or revisioned the character in the sense of this game.
Kenny?
My favorite one is Scooby Doo, just because I love to hear people read Scooby Doo's content, because it's suddenly ruh-roh raggy, we need to do whatever, but it's everybody's starting to try and talk as Scooby Doo, so he's my favorite. But I have to go also with Daphne, because she is that surprising point in the character where you're just like, whoa, she can do some cool things. And that was not something I was expecting you guys to put in there. And I really liked how she came out.
That's great. Pat?
So one of the things I like to do is give any other player the Scooby book so that they have to do that, right? And read the part. And if you pick strategically, you can kind of go, I know who's going to get into it, and hand them that book. I think for me, like, it's really about Velma, because the whole idea here is, right, we're solving puzzles, and if you're thinking like, okay, if these characters were real and I could only bring one of them to an escape room, I'd probably pick Velma, right?
She'd be first round draft pick for sure.
Yeah. And I know, like, we had the early version, right, where it was like she was like the all-star of the show, right? Like her narrative book was a little bit bigger than the other characters, and she was there the whole time. And then it was like, okay, that makes sense because this is her specialty. But I really appreciate how the game was like readjusted and rebalanced to give all of the characters like those key roles and key moments, kind of simulating what we want the players to experience, where everybody feels like they have that key moment in solving the case. But for me, still, it's like, it still makes sense to have Velma kind of at the core, like she's there kind of figuring out some of the puzzles and being the researcher, as it were. So I like the role that she plays in the group.
That's great.
And that all came about in a really weird way, the whole restructuring of the character and the weight that each of them has, because like Jay said, we scaffolded them in, but we forgot in the original like first draft that, oh, Velma's been here since the beginning, and so her book was literally like pages
And
more.
Fred came in at the very, very end originally.
So he was really thin. So
Yeah.
we switched that all around based on feedback from the ops playtesting to balance that play amongst all the playbooks, which is, I think, was brilliant.
Yeah, it added
to
a
get us to do
cool
that.
story plot twist to it too.
Yeah.
Like it added a cool like.
We didn't
yeah.
even know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hated throwing that one at you guys at the end. Like, I guess it's not the end. It was probably about the halfway point when we're starting to test and we're like, you know, she's just too strong of a person here. We need to scale her back. And not being able to say, this is exactly what we want you to do, and just say, we're putting it back in your court. And you guys handled that challenge so beautifully.
It was OP. We had to nerf her.
She was, but
OP,
you did a great job.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. That's
No,
awesome.
it's okay. It's
I
like
made a joke. I made
that
a
is
joke.
not the first time that joke has been made, so you were all good there. So I've got a couple other interesting questions here, and it's been brought up a couple times and it's been shown off. So the repackaging of the game in the envelopes, right? So we don't use stickers, we don't use pens and pencils. The game is made so that you can pack it up when you're done and then play it again in 6 months when you've forgotten how to play, or if you want to give it to someone else. How did that come about?
Well, we knew right off the bat that we didn't want anything destructible, because that just is a one and done, and it's very wasteful. So we definitely wanted some sort of, you give it to your friend, resell it, whatever you want to do, you can live on. So that was at least the first step.
Yeah, I think the other thing about it is that for the amount of effort that we put into it, for it to be played once and have everything destroyed, and then not ever be touched again by human hands, was sad to us. It's not the same as a legacy game, right? Because a legacy game you play like 12 to 24 times, right? And you get your use out of it. But this is a little different. So I think the other thing about it is that stops some people from playing these games, right? When things are destructible, you have to cut things up, and they're like, I don't want to waste it, and I don't want to do that. So from either a price perspective for them or from an ecological perspective for them, we wanted to make this a game that you could reset, reseal, give to your family member, loan out. It could be a game that you could borrow from the library, right? So having those access points for people to get into gaming, I think is really important as well, where you're able to give something away that you enjoyed, and you can spread that joy of gaming and of Scooby Doo to somebody else.
That's great. Pat, Cammie, any thoughts on that?
Well, I would add, like, from the ops perspective, right, is like, obviously you want to sell as many copies of a game as you can, right? That's how we all manage to stay employed in this industry. But at the same time, looking at it as like, well, the way to do that is to make it destructible. And that's just not the case, because the reality is, like, somebody may buy Scooby Doo and Coded Chronicles, and then they're going to share it with a different friend group, right? Because realistically, to play it again with a group who hasn't played it is very difficult. Like Cammie and I have experienced this in the testing. Is like, well, I know all the answers, so I just have to kind of bite my tongue and not help until the group gets really stuck or whatever. But we know this is a series and a brand that we're building, right? And so the idea here is, okay, so if a group buys Scooby Doo Coded Chronicles and then they share it with their other friends who have a gaming group, and that group plays it, it's quite possible that both of those groups will go out and buy the Shining Coded Chronicles because they like the experience and the design of the puzzles and the way the whole system works. And then they'll share those copies out with different friend groups and so on. And so, like, just like our party games, in the way that, by playing it with a group of people, you then sell more copies of the party game because people have a good time and they want to experience more of that brand or that experience. I think Coded Chronicles as a brand, like, it helps itself by being shareable. Getting more players involved and more people accessing the content. So I'm really actually very hopeful that people will enjoy it enough that they're going to go to their friends and say, hey, we played through this, we loved it, you got to take it home, you got to try it out, bring it to your family, your group, and that they'll spread that. and that, you know, as we add more licenses to the portfolio for this brand as well, that people will be like, okay, I like Scooby, and maybe, you know, they're not as big of fans as Jay and Son of Scooby, but then we'll introduce another license that is their, you know, childhood or their favorite IP, and they're like, okay, now is the one I'm ready to like crush all the puzzles and really get through it and show everybody how it's done. So I think that's another aspect to it too, is that we're serving different fan groups and different populations of people who like different things. Probably not a ton of overlap between Shining and Scooby fans, but there certainly is some, right, as we know in this group. So yeah.
Yeah. Cammie?
I think also, you know, just putting it out there, it helps with the licensor perspective too, to know that we are not destroying any of, you know, the stuff that they've built so long as an IP. I mean, we have characters come and go in and out of Scooby Doo, but we never kill anybody off. They're just lost for a while. We don't destroy anything that they love and that they would have a problem with us destroying. This is all just, it's all a story, and it all works, and it's all interwoven, but nothing is lost. Nothing, you know, it's just a matter of trying to pull it all back together. And it makes it a lot easier for us to say, here's what we want to do with, you know, whatever other stories we want to come up with, and be able to say, we're going to treat it respectfully, and we're not going to do anything that you would feel would be, you know, damaging to that story.
That's great. So as we get close to the end of this panel, is there anything else that you guys would like to share with the audience of Coded Chronicles, or the future audience? Like any game tips you want to share, or just stories or thoughts?
Yeah, I don't want to give a tip away. I let people experience the puzzles themselves. But what was interesting with Scooby was totally different for The Shining. With Scooby Doo, we had certain tropes and certain things that happen in a Scooby story that we had to make sure happened in our story. And so if you can imagine what it is, it's in there. So that's happens, and that was fun and really a fun way to try to create it. And then you know, in the future, when we maybe do this again for The Shining, that was a whole different game to try to figure out for The Shining how to create puzzles and a story based on a very specific story that happens. That was really challenging and totally different. Like, why are the puzzles in that story? And did this happen in the movie, or didn't this happen in the movie? We didn't want anything that didn't happen in the movie to not happen in our book, in our game. But then, would people just then know how to solve things because that's how it happened in the movie? So just do this. And so that was really challenging, and I'm super proud of how we managed to figure that one out, which we can talk about in a future.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, we're doing that now with the next thing that we're working on with Coded Chronicles, which we won't name, but we, you know, it's the idea of with licensing working kind of in between the scenes, right? So Jay's implying that we are working in between the scenes. So the things that you see as a fan of any of your favorite things, the Coded Chronicles series, most of the stuff will happen in between the scenes of that thing, but then within the big picture of that thing, if you get what I'm saying. I don't know, I might be confusing you. One thing that I would love, if anybody out there is playing Scooby, if you can tell me the secret stories at the end, I would be super, super proud of your sleuthing. I might even give you a Scooby snack.
Part. That is my very favorite part.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few people who, because I had to read every single narrative book to proof it all.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, you've got to look for this. And they're like, what? I'm like, you got to look for this. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I agree.
Do you know why we did that?
Why?
Because we needed space between the clues.
You know what? I wondered if that was actually it. And,
part of it. And then it just became fun. It just became fun for us to do.
Wouldn't want to look up a clue and then it says wrong, but you could see right below it says right.
Yeah.
You know, boiling down. So we had to figure out some spacers.
Yeah, so they were originally spacers, and then it just became, why don't we actually do something with this?
Right. Yeah, when Cammie pointed that to me, I was like, what? That is in the game? I'm just going to find these now. That's
it's a little Easter egg.
Yep.
Pat?
You know, without getting specific to Scooby, tip-wise, you know, and with any escape room type of puzzle, it's listening to everybody at the table, right? Of if you're not solving it, stop trying to force it with, you know, whoever the loudest person at the table is, but listen to what everybody has to contribute, and maybe you'll unlock something that you didn't see before, and really use the fact that you have different perspectives on a puzzle. I find with a lot of the testing groups, that was the moment where it was like the quiet player finally got a chance to say, what if it worked this way? And it's like, oh yeah, obviously. And then everything moves forward. The thing I wish this panel had, you know, was like a live chat, because I'd love to ask people like, okay, you know, we've got Scooby, we've announced The Shining, we've hinted that there's more, but I'd love to know, like, from a fan perspective, what licenses they'd want to see in this series. We of course have our own internal list of ideas and things that we're excited about, but you know, that kind of feedback from fans of, wow, you know what IP this system would work great for is, you know, and fill in the blank with your favorite, and who knows, right?
Well, put your ideas in the chat below, right? So,
Right? Like and subscribe.
Yeah. So that'll be great. So with that, Sen and Jay, where can people find you after this chat if they want to learn more about what you're working on? Like, are you guys online on Twitter or on Facebook?
Sure.
Or?
You can find me on Twitter at Senfenglim, SENFOONGLIM.
And you can probably find me best at Off the Page Games. That's my new publishing company that I'm doing my own board games with as well.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Pat?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Pat Makes Games, and usually in most of the Facebook communities as well as on BGG. All the games that I've worked on, I follow the thread, so when there's questions and stuff, I jump in there.
And Cammie?
I have the weirdest handle of everybody, so I usually just spell it out. I am Twitter and Board Game Geek. Everything is Skooky D, SKOOKYD. I know it's a very strange thing. It's a nickname I've had since I was about 2 months old, and my mom picked me up one day and she goes, "Are you ready to go someplace, Skooky Dukes?" And I have been Skooky Dukes ever since, and so I have the strangest handle ever.
That's kind of like Scrappy Doo.
I was a little thinking the same thing.
That would be me. And so, yeah, it's a very strange handle, but
no, it's good. So along with that, you can follow the op online. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Twitch, we're on YouTube. Find us for all the new stuff that's coming out. We've got a lot of things that are in the works. If you want to find out more about all of our Coded Chronicles games, be sure to tune in. We have more in the works, obviously with The Shining coming out very soon. And then who knows what's more in store for the Coded Chronicles series. Thank you so much for watching our panel today. And we look forward to more. Thank you so much.